বলছি আমি চলে এসেছি আপনাদের সাথে।
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, sir. You all.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Omajit, should we begin? Right. Good morning, everybody. In fact, during COVID-19 period, the positivity that we had was the virtual mode. And during that time, we arranged a lecture series, international lecture series, in which different scholars, professors around the globe, from home and abroad, delivered a lecture on different topics related to our English literature. This time also I'm going to organize such a lecture series. And this time we are in collaboration with another two colleges. One is Raghunathpur College, another Santaldih College, and myself from Manbhum Mahavidyalaya. So our distinguished speaker will join very shortly. So before that, I invite Professor Srinivas Nandi, head of the institution of Raghunathpur College, to say a few words. Then I will over to Agnibho Chakraborty, the head of the Department of English, Santaldih College, and then I will be back to home with our principal, Dr. Tarun Kumar Ghosh, with a few words from him. So, Professor Nandi, you please, enlighten us with a few words from your end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm very glad to know that the Department of English of Manbhum Mahavidyalaya, Raghunathpur College, and Santaldih College have jointly organized an international lecture series. It's a good gesture on the part of those teachers who are directly related to this session, and I feel very happy because I have been able, or I have been permitted to say some words about this lecture series. However, it is exclusively organized for the students of English honors and program in semester 4 and semester 6. I extend my heartiest congratulations to those professors who have played their active roles in organizing this session. Especially, I'd like to convey a lot of thanks to Professor Partho Sarathi Mondol of Manbhum Mahavidyalaya. At the same time, I express my gratitude to our eminent resource persons, namely Dr. Angshuman Kor, Professor of English, Burdwan University, Professor Agnibho Chakraborty, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Santaldih College, Dr. Dev Prakash, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Central University of Rajasthan, and Professor Elizabetta Marino, Associate Professor, English Literature, University of Rome, Tor Vergata, who will be delivering their lectures in this session. I believe that it will be of immense help to those students who are going to appear at the examination of 6th sem and 4th sem final exam. At the same time, I am very hopeful that this session will be really meaningful and successful, and this endeavor is a really noble endeavor, and students will be benefited a lot. So I believe this lecture session will be really successful, and students and teachers and participants will be enriched from this session. However, I'd like to end here, and I'd like to convey once again a lot of thanks those who are directly and indirectly related to this international lecture session. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Nandi, for your inspiring words. So I will move on to Professor Agnibho Chakraborty, Head of the Department and IQC Coordinator of Santaldih College, to say a few words.
Thank you, sir. So first of all, I always maintain that the students of Purulia, they are not lacking in talent, they're not lacking in effort, but perhaps in the past they have lacked such opportunities to interact with the best minds in the country. And as far as the academic community in Purulia is concerned, I think we have also lacked opportunities in the past, but with such endeavors as the one put together by the IQAC of Manbhum Mahavidyalaya, and as well as departments of English of Manbhum Mahavidyalaya and Raghunathpur College and Santaldih College, I believe that the future is bright. And I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude to all the eminent speakers, to all those who have gathered here. And I'd say that, such opportunities don't come across too often. So we must make the most of such opportunities. And I think, as Dr. Mondol has mentioned in the past, Manbhum Mahavidyalaya has already, taken such initiatives in the past, particularly during the Corona period, where a number of scores of students have benefited from such endeavors in the past. And as I've said that, I think it's a great learning opportunity, not just for the students, but also for us, the professors of Purulia, because, I think we don't get such opportunities too often. And I think at the end of this endeavor, at the end of this lecture series, I think that we'll all be enriched. Not just the students, the professors will also be enriched. And as Dr. Nondi mentioned, I think this will be very beneficial for the students, particularly those who are scheduled to appear for their final examinations. And since, as we all know, that NEP has been introduced, so I think it's a new ball game for all of us. So such efforts, I think, will go a long way in guiding students towards a better future. So thank you, everyone. And particularly, I'd like to thank Dr. Amajit Basu and Dr. Parthasarathi Mondol for taking this initiative. And I hope that such initiatives are taken in the future as well for the benefit of the academic community of Purulia. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor.
I hope I was audible.
Yes, thank you, Professor.
I hope I was audible.
Yes, you are perfectly. And Omajit, one thing that our room has been 97, so don't allow anybody unless and until Professor Kaur actually joined. Professor is going to join shortly. So now, actually, I'm coming back to home. Our honorable principal, Dr. Torun Kumar Ghosh, he has been very positive when I proposed this program to him. He candidly agreed that yes, you go ahead with that, you organize. So my special thanks to our head of the institution, Dr. Torun Kumar Ghosh. So I request Dr. Ghosh to share, to say a few words of inspiration to us. Thank you, Professor. Over to Professor Ghosh.
Am I audible?
Perfectly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mondal. Good morning, dear colleagues and students. We have assembled here virtually for an international lecture series, which will be held from today onwards for 4th and 6th semester students of English honors and program. It is being organized jointly by English departments of 3 colleges: my college, Manbhum Mahavidyalaya, Raghunathpur College, Santaldih College, under the aegis of IQAC, Manbhum Mahavidyalaya. Now let me speak about the English language and its scope, because mostly here the students would be the main stakeholders. The English language binds nations, bridges cultures, and unlocks countless opportunities. English is more than just a means of communication. It is a global phenomenon, a language that transcends borders and connects people from all corners of the globe. With over 1.5 billion speakers worldwide, English is now the most important international communicative language. English is not only a tool for communication, but also a gateway to knowledge. It is the language of science, technology, business, and diplomacy. Proficiency in English opens doors to educational and career opportunities, allowing individuals to connect with the global community and access a wealth of information and resources. Most of the students here do not have English as the mother tongue. Despite of this, you have already taken up a challenge to pursue degrees in English literature. I congratulate you all for taking up this challenge. Now I request you to learn and enjoy the literature sincerely. This is important to inform you all that it has huge job prospects in various sectors, be it academia, industries, and others. We all know It is a digital age that makes the world as a global village. At this moment, the learning of English is a must thing. Otherwise, we cannot match up with the happenings around the globe. For students, I would say it is a good occasion to learn English and interact with some eminent professors from various colleges, universities in India and abroad. We must be you must be, you means the students. Students must be very attentive and interactive during the next 10 days of the lecture series, because the teaching learning is a two-way street, I believe. I wish that this 10-day lecture series will be very good success. At last, I convey my thanks to the professors who will be imparting knowledge among the students. Thanks to the organizers, particularly Professor Mondal, Dr. Amajit Basu, participating colleges and their management, IQAC Manbhum Mahavidyalaya, and of course students. Thank you all.
So thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for your words of inspiration. So now our distinguished speaker, Professor Angshuman Kaur, has joined. So I request Professor Himaloy Jana to introduce Professor Kaur before he starts his lecture. Professor, over to Professor Jana. Himaloy?
Thank you, Asuda. Good morning, everybody. And first of all, I'd like to, as a representative of one of the three organizing departments, I would once again welcome all of you to this lecture series. And I have the privilege today of introducing Dr. Angshuman Kaur, who hardly needs an introduction. He is a professor of English. He's Professor of English, Director, Center for Australian Studies, and former head, Department of English and Culture Studies, the University of Burdwan, India. He has also served the Sahitya Academy, National Academy of Letters in India, as the Secretary of the Eastern Region. As the holder of the Australia-India Council Fellowship 2006, he pursued research on Aboriginal petitions in different universities in Australia. He was offered the distinguished visitorship by Australian National University, Canberra, in 2020. He has presented papers and chaired sessions in several national and international seminars and conferences in India and abroad, including those held at Oxford and Edinburgh. Dr. Kaur's books include Australia-India Encounters, History, Literature, Culture, Marginality in Australian Literature, Partition Memoirs from Two Bengals, Reception of Indian Diaspora in India, Word and Truth, Reading Shankho Ghosh, The Politics of Social Exclusion in India, Democracy at the Crossroads, and Contemporary Indian Diaspora, Literary and Cultural Representations. His articles have appeared in prestigious international journals like Journal of South Asian Review, American Notes and Queries, Antibodies, Asiatic, and Journal of Commonwealth Literature. He has also been published by Routledge, Bloomsbury, and Anthem Wimbledon. Dr. Kaur has completed a UGC-sponsored major research project on Indian diasporic fiction and an Australian India Council-supported project designed for translating Australian Aboriginal poetry into Bengali. His works of translation include Bharatbarsher Kobita, selected poems of Sonnet Mondol, Shimana Chhariye, selected poems of K. Sachidanandan, and Wound is the Shelter, a collection of his own poems in English translation. As a poet, Dr. Kaur has received 8 prestigious awards, including Prithibash Award, Paschim Bongo Bangla Academy Puruskar, and Bongio Sahitya Porishad Puruskar. He has read poems in the USA, Germany, Scotland, and Bangladesh. I would now request Dr. Angshuman Kaur to kindly deliver his lecture.
Such a long introduction, Himalaya. Whatever was written in the CV, you have read it out. Everything. No, there was no requirement.
I was going to do that. But I said,
Anyway,
you hardly get an introduction.
Good morning to all of you. Am I audible? Am I perfectly audible to all of you? Because
yes, you.
I'm not using my laptop today. I'm delivering the lecture using my phone. So a bit scary I am about this. Anyway, I thank organizers and the three colleges, Department of English actually, of the three colleges, and of course the principal of Manbhum Mahavidyalaya, who is present today. My colleagues, co-speakers, some of whom I have already seen, Oyon, who is my student and will be delivering a talk probably tomorrow. I have seen him already. And my dear students. Now, it's a mixed audience because some of you are already well exposed to what post-colonialism is, and some of you needs a bit of introduction. So I have decided, that's why I have decided to divide my talk into two parts, meaning in the first part of my talk, I'll be giving, that might be absolutely redundant to some of you, but because I know that most of the participants are 6 semesters students of the honors course, and that's why a bit of introduction, a few primary things need to be told. So that will be done in the first part of my talk, which will be a kind of introduction, a kind of a basic introduction to what post-colonialism is all about and post-colonial theories. And the second part of my talk will be basically addressing my topic today, reconfiguring post-colonial studies. So that's how I have planned it out. And of course, last 10 minutes or so I can keep for questions and comments as well. Now, I passed out from the university in the year 2000, meaning our batch was supposed to take the exam in 1999, but sessions were running late, and that's why we passed out ultimately in 2000. Our session was 97, 99. At that time, there was no theory in our syllabus. I did my master's from Burdwan University, where I now teach. No theory, not at all. And I can still remember, probably this is something that I told Oyon and some of my other students as well, that when after MA, I participated for the first time in a conference, which was an international conference. That too was held in the year 2000, World Shakespeare Conference. For the first time, I was listening to a few names which were absolutely unknown to me. All was Greek to me. Foucault, Derrida, Lanka. Believe me, in the beginning of 2000, I didn't know anything about them. And I was a JRF. So without knowing all these things, you could crack net, you could get JRF, that was possible. Why I'm telling you this, that in the year 1999, in the West, the first book was published with the title Post Theory. Meaning when in the West, people were talking about the end of theory, in our academia, we did not even begin teaching theories. Right. So this is something which is very, very interesting. We were running almost, you can say, 30 or 40 years late. Anyway, then things definitely changed and changed rapidly. And now we are teaching everything. Now, this anecdote is important because what I have told you is also equally applicable to what we are going to do today, or what we'll be doing in this course, basically. texts which usually we read, analyze, and teach within the broad rubric of post-colonial studies. In fact, in the year 2006, some of you, I'm talking about my young students, undergraduate students, must have heard of the name of MLA, right? Modern Languages Association. They organized a conference in the year 2006, a kind of not a conference it was, I'm sorry, it was a roundtable, discussion. And the title of that roundtable was The End of Post-Colonial Theory. And that was in 2006. Right. So this is something which is very, very interesting, that in 2006, they were declaring the end of post-colonial theory. And we are teaching post-colonial theory very much in the year 2006, and might be that in some of the colleges and universities, even in 2006, at the undergraduate level, post-colonial theory was not even taught when they were declaring the death of post-colonial theory. In fact, 1 year before that, another name with which I'm sure all my colleagues and PG students are very much pretty familiar with, Ania Lumba, they organized a conference in 2004, if I'm not wrong. And then the proceedings of that conference, they published in the form of a book in 2005. And the title of that book is Post-Colonial Studies and Beyond. In fact, if you go through the introduction to this book, you'll find that they have discussed at length that what do they mean by this word beyond? What does the word beyond imply? And this is something that I'll be engaging myself with today as well. But my point is that by 2005, 2006, in the West, the death of post-colonialism was almost declared. And some people were also talking about the need for coming out of this paradigm and moving towards a different paradigm for addressing some of the burning issues with which even now, today, we are confronted. And that is why, once again, we are running late. We are running late when in 2024, I title my talk, Reconfiguring Post-Colonialism. It has already been done. And let me tell you also that I'm not going to tell you anything unique or anything new, because this is a course primarily meant for the students. It's not a seminar paper. So I'll be just opening up a few things, a few avenues for my students and for the young researchers, using which they can pursue further research, and how now we, and particularly as academics and students and researchers of an erstwhile colony, how we now engage ourselves with post-colonial studies. In fact, I am also reminded of another critic whose name is Bilashini Koppan, Bilashini. This is for the students, and Koppan is Coopan. So Bilashini Koppan has given us a time frame regarding the birth and the death of post-colonialism. Bilashini has said that it began with the publication of Edward Said's Orientalism in the year 1978, and it died with the publication of two other critics who are very close to me, to my heart. I admire them a lot. They are two Marxist critics. One is Michael Hart and the other one is Negri. And it's a very famous book. I don't know whether you have read this book or not. I'm talking about my students who are now teachers in different colleges. Michael Hart and Antonio Negri's book, Empire. It has redefined Marxism and how to use Marxism and what should the Marxists do in a changed circumstances. This is something that they have actually done in this book. By change circumstances, I mean in a globalized world. Just give me 1 minute, just 1 minute. Sorry about this interruption. Actually, people, delivery boys, they keep on coming. Sorry about this. So yes, I was talking about that time frame, that it began in 1978 and it ended in 2000 with the publication of that book Empire, which some people, some of the contemporary Marxists consider to be almost as important as the Communist Manifesto, published long back in 1848. So why this time frame? And once again, the death of post-colonialism, remember this. Two things let me point out here. Number one, that I personally, even if you think of, believe in the death of post-colonialism, which is not true because it has changed itself. Post-colonial studies has engaged itself with some, emerging theoretical and philosophical paradigms and epistemological developments. But even if we believe that it died, then it did not die in the year 2000. And it was not born also in that sense in the year 1978. So from now on, let me very briefly, quickly, and this is the part that is meant for the students in particular, give you a kind of an outline of, or a kind of a scheme of what usually post-colonialism means. And the scheme within which we operate as students and researchers. As I've told you that, yes, Said's book, the publication of Said's book in 1978 was something very, very important. And theoretical, philosophical, discursive engagements with literary text in academia began in 1978 and started getting known as post-colonial critical interventions. But this doesn't mean that what we do in post-colonialism began in 1978. For instance, let me just drop two names to make my students aware of the past of post-colonialism as a philosophy or as a discourse. One is Gandhi, and the other one is Frantz Fanon. One is a stalwart of what we can call anti-colonial, a pillar of anti-colonial non-violent resistance. And the other one is exactly the opposite, who believed in violence. If you read Frantz Fanon, Wretched of the Earth, Black Skin, White Mask, he believed in violence. He justified violence philosophically, ideologically. I'm not engaging myself with these two great thinkers and intellectuals of the world, but the point is that what we do, even now in post-colonial studies, had seeds in the writings of Gandhi and Fanon. Just to give two examples, so many others could also be. There could be so many other names as well to fall back upon. But as I've told you that it all began officially in 1978. Why? Because what is the significance of Said's Orientalism, the publication of Orientalism in 1978? Because this book told us, by analyzing so many texts, referring to so many events, that colonialism succeeded not because of the power of the gun, muscle power, but because of the successful formation of a discourse. And those of you who have read Said's Orientalism, they know that Said, and he, of course, explicitly expressed his gratitude to this man as well, that Said was using the word discourse in a Foucauldian way, right? The way Foucault define discourse. What does it mean? That Said made it clear that it was not simply because of the power of the gun, but because of the successful formation of a discourse. This is the discourse that we can identify as or call Orientalism. Through age-old, myths about Orient, literary and other different cultural representations of the Orient by the Occident, certain stereotypes of the Orient were formed to prove that the Occident was culturally superior to the Orient, to justify the process of colonialism. Some of you definitely are reminded of that phrase of Kipling, white man's burden, that we are so much inferior to them, uncivilized, so much we are to them, that we need to be colonized. And this is the discourse. This is the discourse that Said could prove by writing that book, Orientalism, that the colonizers, the imperial forces, could successfully create. Not only that, could successfully propagate and could successfully perpetuate. And we also started, by we I mean the colonized people, started believing in this discourse, started accepting our inferiority. And this is one of the reasons we are so much convinced of our inferiority. If you think of the history of India, then the first significant anti-colonial resistance or revolt, whatever you call it, that took place in India almost 100 years after we lost our independence, 1857, and think of the war of policy. So this is the reason that we all started believing in this. And this is something that when people, they talk about the need for decolonizing ourselves, once again, some of you might be reminded of that famous book, Decolonizing the Mind. They talk about this, that this colonial hangover, we need to come out of. We need to decolonize ourselves first. So my point is that then that's why, meaning in a very systemic way, look, where is Said different from Fanon and Gandhi? Fanon and Gandhi, and why Said became so much important in academia all of a sudden? Because Gandhi and Fanon, they were to some extent, you can say, not only intellectuals, but also activists. And they were not creating any theory as such. They were talking about the need for putting off resistance into different ways, two contradictory ways, but they're trying to address certain conditions as colonized subjects. Said was not doing that. Said was analyzing basically texts. By text, I mean everything actually in the modern day usage. The way text is interpreted, I am using the word text here in that sense. And he was bringing, all these things into academia, proving that in so many countries, the colonizers could rule over for almost 200 years because of this successful formation of the colonialist discourse. That could be called Orientalism. Remember that Said also used Orient as a kind of a metaphor. It doesn't mean that, meaning wherever you are confronted with, or you are analyzing, you are engaging yourself with a colonizer-colonized binary, you can use insights from Said's Orientalism. It does not mean, it doesn't imply that if you are using Orientalism as a philosophical discourse for analyzing text and situations and conditions, it doesn't mean that you need to be always, restricting yourself to Orient as a geopolitical entity. No, not at all. That was not meant by Said at all. But as I've told you that, look, before Said, in academia, and that's why let me also tell you that post-colonial studies, when we are talking about post-colonial studies, we need to remember that post-colonial studies after Said came into academia through different routes, meaning what post-colonial studies was to a historian was not to a literary critic. What it was to a feminist, it was not to a Marxist. So we need to keep that in mind also. But this is the entry point of that kind of a discourse, that kind of a theory into academia. And it entered academia through different routes, as I've told you. With that fundamental focus on the need for analyzing texts, old text, contemporary text, and proving how the colonizers could successfully create a discourse. Remember that Orientalism could also be seen as a kind of a myth. Why myth? Because as I've told you that these are stereotypes. The stereotypes which were created about the Orient, which were shown analytically by analyzing those stereotypes, which were shown by, to some extent, by Said and later on so many other post-colonial critics as well, as falsified narratives, prove that it was a myth. It was not true. Not at all. You can remember once again Chinua Achebe, the way he declared his pride in Africa. In fact, our own anti-colonial nationalism also negotiated both with the East and the West, Indian native past and Western notion of enlightenment. But at the same time, as I've told you, that there also we can notice, a clear sense of pride in our own ancient culture, that we are not inferior to you at all. So that's why it's a myth. You need to keep this in mind. What happened after Said? So in a very nutshell, this is the essence of Said's Orientalism and the change that actually came because of the publication of that book. But what happened after that? Remember that before Said, to a historian, other than the analysis of textual materials and so many other discourses, facts were much more important. Facts that proved how deadly colonialism as a project was. The number of massacres, the amount of bloodshed, all those things. The protests, of course, as counter narratives. But remember that Said shifted the focus, and that's why he was criticized also. After the publication of Edward Said's Orientalism, some people, but that was never meant by Edward Said also, let me be very clear on this. He never said that colonialism was not a project of bloodshed, was not a project of massacre. He said that it was primarily so, but the colonizers could successfully take control of the colonized people for so many years across the globe because of the successful formation of this discourse. Gunpowder alone was not enough to dominate these people. That was fundamentally the argument of Said. But he was misunderstood, and some people question that, what about the bloodshed then? Was colonialism simply a discourse about ideas and notions and textual representations? Said never said so, but the emphasis was on these aspects because these aspects were not properly dealt with within academia before Said, and that's why the book was such a major one. The second problem that happened that to Said was trying to argue that the colonizers could dominate the colonized almost completely because of the successful creation of this discourse. Then came Bhabha, Homi Bhabha, whose famous book is The Location of Culture. In the beginning of the 1980s, Bhabha was delivering different lectures, keynote addresses in different seminars, engaging himself with Said and arguing that we need to examine the colonizer-colonized relationship not simply as a one-way traffic, but as a very complex narrative, two-way traffic, a kind of an asymmetrical power relationship between the colonizer and the colonized. Bhabha was not talking about the symmetrical power relationship that exists between the colonizer and the colonized. It means that it's not that colonizer and the colonized both are equally powerful. No, not at all. Not at all. Of course, colonizers were much more powerful than the colonized, but certain exchanges, certain cross-cultural exchanges, dialogues also took place. Remember that Bhabha was also very clear in pointing out that there was a chapter in Orientalism which was a bit underdeveloped. And in that chapter, a paragraph was there where these notions were put together by Said also, but in a very preliminary way. Basic things were touched upon only. He did not develop this or could not develop this because his focus was something else. Bhabha, acknowledging his indebtedness to Said, developed this notion and then gave us all those theoretical formulations like hybridity, that it produced a hybrid mongrel creature, the notion of third space, which is something beyond these two spaces, the space of the colonizer and the colonized, the notion of the mimic man, that how the colonized people went on imitating the colonizers and thereby becoming mimic men and identifying the power of menace, which is hidden in mimicry. Mimicry itself is always menacing, subversive, and how ultimately we could write back our own, by we I mean once again the colonized people, write back our own narrative as well, a kind of a counter discourse as well. গোটাটাই ওদের জয় ছিল তেমনটা নয়। But remember, once again, Bhabha was also misunderstood because some people, they started, after Bhabha came, they started talking about this, that what was it then? Said talked about use of the discourse, and you were talking about the asymmetrical power relationship between the colonizer and the colonized and the production of a kind of hybrid culture. Then what was it? Was colonialism then a very good project, a benevolent project? That was never Bhabha's intention. Bhabha was trying to, in a way, kind of supplement Edward Said and trying to prove that it was not a discourse in which the colonizers, with a kind of a supremacy dominated the colonized. The narrative was not that easy. The narrative was a bit more complex. But remember, once again, he said that it was an asymmetrical power relationship. This is the phrase that I'm underlining time and again. Let me just give you one example. কদিন আগে আমার এক বন্ধু কবি, সে একটা লেখায় এটা ব্যবহার করেছে, আমার এত ভালো লাগলো এই মেটাফোরটা, অন্য একটা কনটেক্সটে, ভাষার ক্ষেত্রে, কিন্তু এটা এখানে সত্য। যেমন তোমরা যারা দেখেছো যে আমি কেন বলছি হাইব্রিডিটি, ইফ ইউ জাস্ট পিক আপ আ ভলিউম অফ Oxford English Dictionary, how many Indian words are there? Right? How many? In fact, if you read philology, you need to read about about this also, the entry of Indian English words in Oxford English Dictionary. So many. Does it mean that we have also colonized Britain? No, not at all. Not at all. It's a question of impact. It's a question of asymmetrical power relationship. এই আমার যে বন্ধুর কথা বললাম, অনুজ বন্ধু, সে বলেছে যে দুটো গাড়ির যখন সংঘর্ষ হয়, বিজ্ঞান এটা, একটা বড় ট্রাক, ভারী ট্রাক আর একটা ছোট্ট মারুতি ভ্যান, তখন মারুতি ভ্যানের কিছু অংশ ট্রাকটার ভেতরে ঢুকে যায় হেড অন কলিশন হলে, কিন্তু একেবারে ছিঁড়ে চাপটা হয়ে যায় মারুতি ভ্যানটা, কিছুটা ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয় অবশ্যই বড় ট্রাকটাও, তার ক্ষতির পরিমাণ অনেক কম, ক্ষতির পরিমাণ অনেক বেশি হচ্ছে ছোট মারুতি ভ্যানটার। Exactly this is what Bhabha wanted to mean by talking about the asymmetrical power relationship between the colonizer and the colonized, and the result that it produced. আমাদের ক্ষতি হয়েছে অনেক বেশি, আমাদের উপর ওদের প্রভাব পড়েছে অনেক বেশি, আমরা ওদের ক্ষতি করতে পেরেছি কম, ওদের উপর আমাদের প্রভাব ফেলতে পেরেছি কম, কারণ আমাদের গাড়িটা ছিল ওই ছোট্ট মারুতি ভ্যান। And then came another, when we talk about that, when we talk about post-colonial studies, we talk about the Trinity. Then came Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, who talked about the subaltern, who talked about the gender aspect of post-colonial studies and how powerful, or whether at all powerful, the subalterns were in producing a kind of a counter narrative and discourse. এইসবের মধ্যে আমি যাচ্ছি না, কেননা আমাদের আর বোধহয় আধ ঘন্টাও সময় নেই। So this is the first part of my talk. As I told you that I'll give an outline of some of the basic ideas and notions of post-colonial studies. Now the point is that in 1978, the world was a different place altogether, absolutely a different place. There was no internet in this way. Airfare was much higher. Movement from one country to another was very, very difficult. Not only that, we did not heard of this word also, globalization, without which perhaps we can't live anymore. Remember, again here, just a kind of a warning that when I use the word globalization, I am using it in a very specific way. Some people keep on arguing that the world has always been a globe and travel has always been there, movement of things, and of course those things were there, but the changing role of capital did not determine all these things then. And that's why the change of capital to finance capital, the character of capital changed, and the impact that market economy actually had on global economy and on socio-political realities, geopolitical mapping of the world. These are the things that I actually specifically mean when I'm using the word globalization, following Arjun Appadurai, who has talked about different steps of globalization. So in a very specific and narrow sense, I'm using the word globalization, and it was unknown to us. Now, in fact, some of us keep on arguing, this is now the point, that reconfiguring post-colonial studies, what should we do? What should we do? After all these changes, as I've told you, in fact, if you read that book, Postcolonial Studies and Beyond, globalization has been identified by Ania Lumba and others as the most important thing that post-colonial studies now must address, engage with. And as I've told you already, that they are not arguing. Death has been declared. Death of post-colonial studies has been declared by so many already because of all these changes, but they have never said that we are declaring the death of post-colonial studies. They are saying that it should come out of its defined trajectory and periphery and move out to new directions. And that's why the word beyond suggests a kind of an open-endedness. And this is something that we should keep in mind. But there is another book, and this is also something which is very, very important. Once again, if you can have a look at this book, I ask all of you to have a look at this book, because when we are talking about the need for reconfiguring post-colonial studies, this book, published by Routledge also, is a kind of must reading for all of us. The title of the book is Rerouting the Postcolonial, New Directions for the New Millennium. Rerouting the Postcolonial. Look, from the title itself, they are also talking about redirecting it, enabling the critics to find out new avenues, the philosophers to discover new vistas. And it's a book which has been edited by, it's an edited volume, Janet Wilson, Christina Sandru, and Sarah Lawson Wells. A very important addition to post-colonial studies this book is, so far as I told you that our present-day engagement with this discipline is concerned. In fact, let me just quote a portion, 2 or 3 lines from this book to make you understand that what are the issues that they're talking about. When I have already identified that the world changed because of globalization, finance capital, that emerged, emergence of advent of multinational companies, and then ultimately transnational companies, meaning the world rapidly changed. Now, remember that now, if you engage yourself with, say, a 16th or 17th or 18th century text and apply, say, its notions to read those texts, that is fine, that could be done. But that field has also got exhausted. It's very difficult for you to find out something new if the text is not absolutely untouched, because much has already been said in the last 40 years or so in all those areas. Difficult. That's why some people said that this field has got exhausted and the death was declared. But suppose you are dealing with a text which is written by an Indian author with a colonial heritage, talking about the colonial past. And if you don't engage yourselves with the present-day geopolitics, culture and economy, that won't be justice done to that author and to the text, because he's writing the text sitting in the first decade, might be, of the 21st century, and having a look behind. It could also be, for instance, if you read, let me give you one example, Aravinda Adhika, right? Contemporary India. Now, a cheap post-colonial reading of this text is not enough for us. That would look simplistic. That's why we're talking about, and critics are talking about, rerouting the post-colonial, post-colonialism and beyond, reconfiguring the post-colonial. How could that be done? Already, as I've told you, that Ania Lumba and her colleagues, they have identified globalization to be the most important thing that changed the entire discipline of post-colonial studies. Absolutely. It's not simply a shift from from the colonial to the neo-colonial. Even neo-colonialism is not enough to address the complexities that the world has witnessed in the last 20 years or so. That's why we need a different paradigm. That's why you're talking about the need for reconfiguring the post-colonial. Remember here also, I should have told you this much earlier, that the term post-colonial is no more used with the hyphen, and it's no more a temporal marker, meaning post-colonial does not mean simply, of course, whatever has been written after colonialism or after all these colonies got back their independence, but it means actually both, right? Colonial texts are also very much important ingredients of post-colonial studies. But as I told you, that engagement with those texts also are gradually becoming difficult because the field has got exhausted, more or less. It's very difficult for you to find out new things if you're a researcher. And what about the present? What about the present? Just let me just quote a portion from that book, Rerouting the Postcolonial. where they have written, let me quote, just listen to this. As intimated above, the post-colonial has moved in recent years from being a historical marker to a more globally inflected term applicable to a variety of regions. A variety of regions. What are these things? What are the areas that they are talking about?
Moushumi Banerjee, you...
Of course, global is a term which is something very, very important. The mixing of the global and the local. Right. And a kind of dialectics, right, between the local, the national, and the transnational is something that we need to examine. In fact, if you read Bill Ashcroft has talked about transnation, that the notion of the old nation state has undergone in the last few years important changes. And that's why we are in a transnational world. People are talking more and more about transnationalism nowadays. And if you're living in a transnational world, how to engage yourself with post-colonial studies then? Not only that, stateless people are there globally. It's one of the major concerns of the present day. So many people are stateless, homeless, stateless, refugees, permanent refugees, asylum seekers. Cosmopolitanism also has come up as another very important, point of engagement. Right. So what to do then? If you want to now study post-colonialism, or rather you want to engage yourself with post-colonial studies, what to do? You need to address all these issues. Gone are those days when we usually used to restrict ourselves to that binary of the colonizer and the colonized. We need to talk about the Rohingyas within the discipline of post-colonial studies. And you'll be getting novels also which will be addressing their problems, the problems of the stateless people. Diasporic texts. The way diaspora has emerged as a theoretical discipline and as a kind of a veritable reality has not been possible without the colonial encounter. So in that sense, diaspora is also an offshoot of colonialism. And it's impacting heavily the socio-cultural, political fabric of the quote-unquote host lands. Though people are saying that Rishi Sunak will lose the election this year, but he became the Prime Minister. Baba jeto na geta, a colonial encounter na hole. So that's why I'm telling you that post-colonialism as a discipline is not dead. I agree with Ania Lumba. We need to go beyond post-colonialism. We need to reconfigure it. Because Rishi Sunak, just to give you one example, is a reality that is the result of the encounter between the colonizer and the colonized. But if now you want to map Rishi Sunak out theoretically as a political entity, the paradigm of post-colonialism won't be enough to analyze that. You need to engage yourselves with diaspora studies, with migrants, and what are they doing? What are the other diasporic communities in the UK they are doing? What is their take on Rishi Sunak, and Prime Minister of Indian origin? This is how we need to reconfigure the parameters of post-colonial studies. Environment, for instance. Migration, diaspora, stateless people, refugee problem, globalization, as I told you, market economy, these things are there. Environment, another major concern. And once again, you cannot dissociate environment. That's why post-colonial eco-criticism has emerged and has got a kind of a momentum as well as a theoretical discipline. Post-colonial environmentalism as well. You cannot talk about environmentalism without referring to the colonial history of the world. Because colonialism was basically also a project of deforestation. But again, if you want to engage yourself with, say, let me give you the name of a book. The title of the book is The Swan Book, written by Alexis Wright. Australia is the venue for this book, and it's a world in which we find that eco-disaster is a reality. It has already taken place. Novel is set 100 years after. If you want to read that book in the light of post-colonial theories, once again, while reading Australian literature, Australia was also a colony like ours, though the nature of the colony was different. The colonizer-colonized binary that we used to apply, that could be applied to reading Swan Book. But there is a white fellow, a woman from the global north, who actually gives shelter to a gang-raped Australian Aboriginal girl whose name is Oblivion in that novel. And then in that novel also we find that another Australian Aboriginal man becomes the Prime Minister of that future Australia. Engagement with this novel from the perspective of environment, actually, am I audible to you? Am I audible to you?
Yes, yes,
problem?
Yes,
Okay.
no problem.
So as I told you that engagement with this book then implies both. You need to use the colonial past of Australia, and it's a kind of a speculative fiction, almost a kind of science fiction. You need to engage yourself with the present and a kind of a dystopic future that is projected in the novel. So this is another way that you can reconfigure post-colonial studies by making it interact with environmentalism, environment. So this is the new term that I'm talking about. In fact, let me also tell you that while talking about reconfiguring post-colonial studies, there are some people who have talked about the need for putting emphasis on aesthetics. This is also something that usually you don't do because texts have all become culture texts, and that's why while reading a text, you analyze the text historically, culturally, ideologically, without paying much attention to the aesthetic value of the text or the aesthetic experiments which are carried out by the authors, the old traditional school of reading. When some people are talking about getting ourselves beyond the boundary of post-colonial studies, they are actually talking about engaging ourselves with this aesthetic aspect of texts as well. This is how also we can reconfigure post-colonial studies. My time is almost up, so let me just sum it up that it has been an attempt to make you aware of that what we can do and what people are actually doing. These are the things that nowadays are, so many times we are not calling them post-colonial studies, but if you look at the different post-colonial studies department of the globe, you'll find that scholars and critics, they are actually doing this kind of stuff. This is the reason that we need to reconfigure post-colonial studies. The earlier paradigm is not enough to address all these issues which are related to, of course, the theoretical discipline of post-colonial studies and the colonial past of the world, but at the same time are a bit different from all those things also because of the changes. the changes that took place, that happened due to globalization mainly. Our calling bell budget. Give me 1 minute. I'll come back. That's it. I'll come back and take your comments and questions. So that's it. As I told you, that I'm not arguing in favor of the death of post-colonialism. It's not dead, but we need to reconfigure it. We need to engage ourselves with new avenues, new insights, new realities, and this is being done. This is being done. Thank you. কারোর যদি কোনো কমেন্টস 10 মিনিট আমাদের আছে, সেভাবেই আমি ছাড়লাম, বা কোয়ারি যদি থাকে।
কারো কোনো প্রশ্ন থাকলে করতে পারো,
কমেন্টস থাকলেও, শুধু প্রশ্ন না, কারো যদি কোনো অবজারভেশন থাকে তাহলেও হতে পারে। আমি তো তাড়াতাড়ি ছেড়ে দিলাম, তাহলে তো কমেন্টস না থাকলে আমি একটু বলতে পারতাম। আমি ভাবলাম যে কিছু প্রশ্ন এলে তার উত্তরে বলবো। ইনফ্যাক্ট এনিথিং ফ্রম মাই কলিগস অ্যাজ ওয়েল, দ্যাট টু ইজ ওয়েলকাম। নাথিং, তাহলে তো সময়ের আগেই শেষ হয়ে গেল। তাহলে কি দ্যাটস ইট, শেষ করে দিই? পারতো হিমালয়? তোদের কারোর কিছু অ্যাড করার যদি থাকে তো করতে পারিস।
Sir, good morning.
Yes, morning.
Sir, please tell me what book should I read first to get the very basic idea about post-colonial literature, sir?
There is a book once again written by Ania Lumba, probably colonialism, post-colonialism, or something like that, right? So you can read that one, or a short introduction to post-colonialism, which is published by Routledge, if I'm not wrong. You can also read the chapter on post-colonialism in Peter Reed's Beginning Theory. So these are the books. These are the books that
there is a book by Leela Gandhi.
Leela Gandhi's book is a bit ideologically dense, meaning it's not that good for the beginners. These are the books that I have actually named are very good for the beginners.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome. Anything else?
Anyone from our students?
তাহলে আমরা ছেড়ে দিই, পারতো? হ্যাঁ, আমার ইউনিভার্সিটি।
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Kaur, for your engaging lecture, and you have, you could manage time from your busy schedule to address our students. So, once again, thank you very much for your cooperation.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. So now we'll, I think our next, speaker is Professor Agnibho Chakraborty. He'll be speaking on Keats' Ode to Nightingale. So, Professor Chakraborty, have you joined?
Yes, I'm here.
So now, I would like to introduce Professor Chakraborty. He's an assistant professor, Department of English, Santaldih College. He's a very, young scholar, deeply rooted in, modern researchers in literature, and very good teacher of literature. He has number of publications in different journals. So he is also one of the organizers. So I request Professor Chakraborty to make his presentation. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Dr. Mondal. So, as I've mentioned before, that this is a wonderful initiative that has been taken by the IQAC of Manbhum Mahavidyalaya in collaboration with Raghunathpur College and my college. So, first of all, I'd like to express my heartfelt gratitude for providing me with this opportunity, as well as the students here. Whether any of you are familiar with Jacques Lacan or Freud, you need not use the microphone. You may just raise your hands if you have heard of Freud and Lacan. Okay, I see one hand. I see just one hand. Okay, 2 or 3 hands are coming up gradually. So, Professor Kaur was mentioning in his lecture that, many of you find yourselves at sea when you start your master's degree, because many of you actually are bombarded with new ideas, new names, new concepts that you have very little idea about. So, which is why I'd like to thank the Board of Studies of SKBU for introducing literary theory in the curriculum, because I believe at least a smattering of knowledge of literary theory is important, at least for those. Yes, Dr. Mondal?
Yes.
Yes. Now, you wanted to add something to that?
No, it's audible.
No, I thought you wanted to add something to that. Yes.
No, nothing. You continue.
Okay. So, as Dr. Kaur mentioned, that many of you find yourselves at sea when you start pursuing your master's degree, because you're suddenly bombarded with these new names, new ideas, Foucault, Derrida, Lacan, and suddenly you find yourselves at sea because you're not familiar with these concepts at all. So today I'll be introducing you to just a smattering, just the basics of Lacan. I won't be going in too much into details, but I'll be introducing to Lacan. Let's just say that it's one stage in the evolution from Freud, let's say. Many of you are familiar with Freud, but many of you may not be familiar with Lacan. So I'll introduce you to Lacan. So when we look at the text of Ode to a Nightingale, what is the first thing that strikes us? The first thing that strikes us, I think, is a tension between the material and the ideal. Now, Keats, as we realize, is trying to escape this material world. And he's trying to use various vehicles of escape: wine, opium. He refers to it repeatedly throughout the initial section of the poem. He refers to wine, he refers to opium, and he also refers to death as easeful death. So it is obvious that he wants to escape this material world. And why does he want to escape this material world? The primary reason for that is everything here is transient. Nothing lasts forever. Beauty doesn't last forever. People grow old, people die, and anything that seems beautiful at this point in time is eventually going to fade away, dissolve, and die. Right? So this is the primary reason Keats wants to escape materiality or this material world, as it were. Now, let me introduce you to Laka, or at least the basics of Laka. I can't say that I know too much about Laka, because I think in order to understand Laka, you have to spend a lifetime. So, but at least I'll introduce you to some basic concepts. So today, the primary concepts that I'll introduce you are the concepts of the imaginary and the symbolic order. And we'll also talk a little bit about the mirror stage. Am I audible?
Yes.
So I'll talk to you a little bit about the mirror stage. We won't go into the real. Let's say Freud talks about the id, the ego, the superego. Laka talks about the imaginary, the symbolic order, and the real. Now, we won't spend too much time discussing the real, but we'll be talking a little bit about the imaginary order, the mirror stage, and the symbolic order. Now, imagine this. You have to visualize this. Now, as a child, and I'll explain why this is important in the context of Keats. So imagine a child standing in front of a mirror, and this child is not yet aware that its limbs are part of its own body. All its experiences are disjointed. A child's existence in the stage of infancy is entirely disjointed, disconnected, as Keats, perhaps Eliot would say, it's like a heap of broken images with no sense of coherence, as it were. So, and it is in this context that a child stands in front of a mirror, and when a child sees itself in front of the mirror for the first time, it realizes, it sees an image of wholeness, completeness, which is what the child had desired for a long time. It sees itself in the mirror, and gradually a sense of self, a sense of identity starts emerging. It starts to distinguish itself from others. The I as opposed to the O. I, my name is Agnibho Chakraborty, as opposed to the other person. So it learns to make these distinctions, and it starts to develop a sense of self. Now, as it turns out, Laka says that because the image in the mirror is illusory, and because it is a two-dimensional image, it doesn't quite capture the complexity of the body. Okay, it is an illusion, let's say. Now, throughout the course of our lives, we try to recapture that image of perfection that we had initially seen in the mirror. And what happens? We fail to do so, because I've always maintained that perfection is a utopian concept. Nothing can be perfect. Now, we chase after perfection. We chase after that image of perfection that we had seen in the mirror when we were infants. And what is Keats doing here? What is Keats doing here? Keats is chasing an ideal. Now, imagine Keats is standing in front of the mirror. Now, Keats is the child. Keats sees himself in the mirror, and Keats sees an image of perfection. Keats sees a world that is entirely distinct from the world that he wants to leave behind. A world that is full of fever, fret, fear, palsy, and transience. And he wants to leave this world far behind. He wants to enter the realm of perfection. He wants to enter the realm of the ideal, as it were. Now, I hope I'm making sense. So now imagine Keats as this child who is trying to develop a sense of self, a sense of identity, and he sees himself in the mirror. Here, in the poem though, instead of the mirror, we have...
Hey,
Nightingale.
Professor Chakraborty,
Yes.
if you please turn on your camera, because it's YouTube streaming is on.
I understand, but I'm in transit right now, so I don't think that will be possible.
Okay.
So, as I said, try to imagine Keat as a poet standing in front of this mirror instead of an infant, and what Keat sees in the mirror is perfection. Okay, now instead of the mirror, what we have here is the Nightingale. Okay, now a number of students make this mistake. Right? It would be perfect. It would have no imperfections, because we know that he wants to leave this imperfect world behind, and he's already, talking about opium. He's talking about wine, and he's making every effort possible to leave this material world behind, because it is an imperfect world. So when he leaves this imperfect world behind on his viewless wings of poesy, and he enters this perfect world, this moonlit bower, this garden, we would expect this garden to be perfect in every way possible. But what do we see here? Do we see a sunny spring day? Do we see greenery? We don't. To begin with, it is a moonlit garden. Okay? And secondly, I believe he talks about fast fading violets. This part for students, I believe, is very, very important. Fast fading violets. This section that he talks about when he makes his foray into the bower. Now, as I told you, this moonlit bower is supposed to represent perfection, much like the image in the mirror which the child sees in the stage of infancy. And it is not supposed to be characterized by transience and impermanence. Then we as students, we must learn to question. Why then are the violets fading? The violets are supposed to be perfect. Everything is supposed to be permanent. Now, if we go back to one of his other odes, Ode on a Grecian Urn, what does Keat say in Ode on a Grecian Urn? He talks about the urn itself as a symbol of perfection. But eventually he comes to the realization that there are limitations to this perfection. Right? Because perhaps perfection is cold. Perhaps perfection is uninspiring. Right? And are you familiar with Ode on a Grecian Urn? Have you read Ode on a Grecian Urn? Yeah, I believe that, when you're studying a poet, it is important for you to study the entire oeuvre of a poet in order to understand the trajectory of their career. If you're studying Keats' Ode to a Nightingale, then I think it is absolutely imperative that you also study Ode on a Grecian Urn, because the trajectory of the two poems are very similar, and he comes to similar conclusions in both poems, I would say. And in both poems, we see this tension, this continuous oscillation between the ideal and the material. And from a psychoanalytical perspective, I would say this is an oscillation between the imaginary perfection and the symbolic order. Okay, so now, as I told you, this moonlit bower is supposed to represent perfection. But there are doubts that start creeping into our mind that if this bower does indeed represent perfection, why is it moonlit? Why is it dark? Why can't Keat see what flowers are there at his feet? And why indeed are the violets fading fast? Right? So as students, we are also scholars, we are thinkers, we are students of English literature. So we must not follow what, critics are there obviously to guide us. We must take ideas from critics, but do not blindly quote critics, also learn to be a critic, I would say. And this is one area in Ode to a Nightingale where I, while studying the poem for the first time, I had this question in my mind that if indeed this is a representation of perfection, why then are there remnants of imperfection, the remnants of the world that he has left behind? Why do we find remnants of materiality in Keats's vision of perfection? Right? So here, obviously, you're functioning as a critic yourself. You're thinking. Right? Let me give you another example. Let's say, let's talk about, let's digress a little bit. Let's talk about what Harold Bloom had to say about Ode to Autumn. He says, Harold Bloom says, he's of the opinion that Ode to Autumn represents finality, represents death. But you can counter that with the argument that perhaps it doesn't represent finality, because any reference to a season implies that it will come again. So rather it represents a cycle, the end of something, but the beginning of something new. And this is how you learn to, I wouldn't say question critics, but add to what critics have to say. And as students of English literature, you must learn to do that. This is the first thing that you must learn to do. You must not follow and quote critics blindly. Study critics, obviously, but add to what they have to say instead of following them blindly. So coming back to the poem. Now, adieu, adieu, he says, and he feels that he has been cheated by fancy. He feels that he has been cheated by fancy. Why does he feel that he has been cheated by fancy? Because he is unable to sustain this vision of the moonlit bower. He's forced to come back, he's compelled to come back to reality, to materiality, to this world that he so wanted to leave behind. But he's forced to come back. And perhaps in a fit of anger, a fit of frustration, he says that he has been cheated by fancy. Right. Now, let's take an example. Let's imagine a person born and brought up inside the confines of a room. A person, let's say, who's 20 years old, who has spent his entire life inside his own home, who has never stepped outside his own home, outside the confines of his own home. And it would appear that he is satisfied with his life, he's satisfied with his experiences, until one fine day, someone gives him a mobile phone or a laptop, and he realizes what he has been missing all these years, because he has never stepped outside the confines of his home. He has never seen how beautiful the world outside is. And suddenly, now that he has a taste of what the world outside has to offer, he wants to leave. He no longer wants to stay inside. Now, try to contextualize this. Now, try to imagine Keats. Now, Keats has been given a glimpse, a taste of perfection, right? When he makes his foray into this moonlit bower, what we see is he leaves this world far behind, this world of materiality, leaves it far behind, and he enters this perfect world, which, as I've already mentioned, may not be so perfect after all, because it is moonlit, because he can't see what flowers are at his feet. It defies our expectations of pastoral perfection. Now, now that he has had a glimpse, a taste of what perfection is, he doesn't want to go back. But he's unable to sustain this vision. And this is where Laka comes into the picture again. As I've mentioned in the past, that our lives, our experiences are dictated by a certain set of rules, by a certain set of do's and don'ts. I'm trying to simplify Laka as far as possible for you, because Laka is difficult, it is complex, so I'm trying to simplify it as much as I can. Now, try to just visualize this. Our lives, the lives that we lead, are all dictated by a certain set of rules, certain do's, certain don'ts. There are things that you can do, there are things that you can't do. There are certain laws that govern our experiences, right? Now, let's put it this way. What Laka talks about in the symbolic order, as far as the symbolic order is concerned, he is talking about this experience. He's talking about a controlled experience which is governed by a set of laws, a set of rules. And when does this happen? When a person enters into the realm of language. Now, as we know, the unconscious is structured like a language, therefore, as soon as we enter the realm of language, in other words, as soon as we learn to speak, as soon as we learn to say, this is me, Agnibho Chakraborty, as soon as I learn to say that, I enter into this realm of rules and do's and don'ts and these laws which govern everything that I do and everything that I don't do. So when Keats makes his way to the garden, he is not just free of materiality, he is not just free of fever and fret and pain and palsy. He is also free of the rules that govern us. He is also free of the limitations, he's also free of everything that limits our experiences. He's also free of the laws. He's also free of every do and every don't that we experience on a daily basis. And perhaps then we must question, what does Keats really desire? Because we know that Keats talks about death as easeful, right? So perhaps all Keats desires is freedom, complete freedom. Freedom from limitations, freedom from laws, freedom from every single set of laws that governs us. Let's put it that way. And when he goes into this moonlit power, he finds freedom. But he sees that that freedom is also plagued with remnants of the world that he has left behind. Right? And so he must come back. Now, if I go back to the mirror stage, right, which I discussed earlier, like when a child, Dr. Mondal, I'm getting a call from the controller of the university, so just give me 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yes, I apologize for the interruption. I was getting a call from the respected controller of the university. Right, so as I was saying, let us just go back to the image of the child standing in front of the mirror, and let's just say the image of wholeness and completion that a child sees, albeit in two-dimensional form, albeit illusory, is still the image of perfection that we hold dear to our hearts as we grow up, as we experience our lives. And perhaps that is the image of perfection that we chase throughout the course of our lives. And that is the image of perfection that we fail to grasp, that we fail to achieve throughout the course of our lives. And our unconsciously, perhaps we are chasing it, but our endeavors always end in failure, right? And that is where I would say romantic poetry is supposed to be essentially confessional poetry. It's essentially meant to be very, very personal. But this is somewhere I would say that romantic poetry, this poem in particular, I would say, is universal. Same intent as Keats. This world of laws and rules, all of us want to escape materiality, perhaps not through opium, perhaps not through wine, but we have our own avenues of escape. For some people, it may be music. For some people, it may be art. But throughout the course of our lives, what are we really trying to do? We are trying to escape the limitations of materiality and, albeit momentarily, enter into an ideal realm, a world of perfection. When we watch a movie, for instance, we forget reality for maybe a couple of hours, we forget reality. When we go to an art exhibition, what is the intent behind that? We want to forget reality, leave it far behind. When we go to a music concert, when we listen to classical music, for instance, what are we essentially trying to do? We are all essentially trying to do what Keats attempts to do but fails. All of us are in the same boat as Keats, and this is why I say that yes, it is an intensely personal expression. This poem is an intensely personal expression, but at the same time, it is universal because we all sort of empathize with Keats's endeavor, we all kind of empathize with him, and we are all in the same boat because we are all trying to do what Keats is trying to do, and that's what makes this poem, I would say, a universal poem. If you have any questions thus far, you may ask me. Regarding Laka, if you have had any difficulty in understanding the concept of mirror stage or the symbolic order, I can explain it further. So I don't see any questions here, right? So, right. So this essentially is
Professor Gill. Hello.
Yes, Dr. Mondal.
You can just repeat that Laka, that area, because I think if you repeat, the students will understand in a better way again.
I understand, and this is why I believe that at least psychoanalysis should be taught at least at a basic level, in colleges, I believe. If not Laka, at least Freud, because at least the application of these theories, we see the application of these theories in our answers at least. So yeah, anyway, so as Dr. Mondal requested, I'll just repeat this section. So a child, an infant, someone under the age of 2, has a very disjointed experience. And essentially what a child is yearning for is a sense of completion, a sense of wholeness. Okay? And when does a child find a glimpse of that wholeness, that sense of completion? Because its entire experiences are disjointed. In fact, a child is unable to identify that its limbs are its own hands and legs are a part of its own body. That's what Laka has to say. So its experiences is essentially based on impulses and drives. And when a child sees itself for the first time in the mirror, it sees itself whole, complete. And at least momentarily, is able to get rid of that disjointed experience that has characterized its life so far. And as it stands in front of the mirror and sees itself whole, complete, it realizes that this is me, this is I, and gradually a sense of self